Let's talk about components now. So we mentioned in our introduction to React Native that an app is made up of components. So what are components exactly? Well, components are just small building blocks that you put together into your full application. So I introduced you when I showed you how to get started. I introduced you when we did that example. I introduced you to two different components. There is a view component, which is a container that contains all the other components on each screen of your app. So each screen of your app should have a view component that contains everything. And that's pretty much, you got to have that. So there's no way of getting really around that. Okay, so there's a view component. I also showed you the text component. So obviously by the name of it, that's going to hold some text. So like a paragraph or just a small snippet. But there are other built-in components as well that you can just use right out of the box for React Native. Okay, how would I find out what those are? Okay, well, let's do our normal routine. So let's just do an internet search. So I'll search on something like, so for example, React Native built-in components. Okay, and so let's see, that first one that comes up looks pretty promising. So let's see what's there. Looks like it's on the official documentation site of React Native, and it's core components and APIs. So that looks like maybe something we should take a look at. So React Native provides a number of built-in core components ready to use in your app. So here's kind of what we're looking for. What are the built-in components that we can use right out of the box without having to do anything? Okay, so there's a basic one. So it looks like the view. Okay, that's the one we know about. Most fundamental component for building a UI, a user interface. There's a text component for displaying text. Pretty clear about that one. Image, that's probably going to hold a picture. Text input, that's probably an input box where you can have your user type in stuff. Scroll view, that's probably something where if you have like a screen that's too big for the device, you can scroll up and down. And then style sheet, well, we've seen about styles already, so we kind of know about that one also. So those are your basic ones. Looks like there's some more components as well that we can use. There's a button and a switch, list views, flat list, and section list, Android components and iOS components. So if you're building something specifically for an Android platform or an iOS platform, you want it specifically to run on just those platforms. It looks like there's some other specialized things you can use. And of course, there's some others: alert, animated, dimensions, keyboarding view. So those are all, if you use apps on any level on your phone or your tablet, you probably will recognize most of those, what they do. Okay, so those are all built in. You can use them right out of the box in your React Native app. Remember, the only thing you need to do in order to use them is you have to import them. So remember at the top, our import section, you just have to make sure you include a line like that that lists out all the different built-in components that you want to use in your app. Okay, so there's actually quite a few of them. So you could actually build a pretty sophisticated and nice looking app just by using the built-in React Native components. But the real power of programming nowadays is that you can add on not only other components that other people have already built, but you can also make your own components as well. And so you can make custom components. And so let me show you kind of how that works. Okay, so now this is what you're looking at here. This is kind of the standard out of the box. So when you first open up a new project in React Native, it just gives you this kind of skeleton code. And you can just trash it all if you like and just start from scratch, or you can build upon it, you can tweak it. So I'm just using this as a demo just to show you some things about components. So if we look at our main function, the main portion of our app, the main body, which remember is in the center, it's the middle section. If you look at what's going on there, so if you look at the setup of it, we have the view component that surrounds everything. That's always how it's going to be on each page. Within the view, we have a text component. So the text component is that section. And in the text component, we have some text that says change code in the editor and watch it change on your phone. Save to get a shareable URL. Okay, so if you look at the preview section here on the right, you can see exactly where that is. Okay, that's kind of right here. So we can kind of see, okay, that section, that text section corresponds to that portion of our app. Okay, then looks like we have something called a card. I'm not sure what that is, but it's some kind of, looks like maybe, sounds like it's maybe some kind of a just a background. And you can kind of see like this section here where this picture is. Okay, this white kind of rectangle underneath the text. Looks like that might be a card. A card sounds like maybe it's like a background card, maybe it's like a colored background, I'm guessing. So there's a card section, and then inside the card section, there's another component called assert example. Oh, excuse me, asset example. So we're wondering, okay, what is asset example? Well, maybe it's a built-in component. So maybe we go back to our documentation here. Maybe we search it up. Maybe we try to find it in the docs. But if you do, you won't find asset example, okay? Because what asset example is, and I'm guessing it's probably going to be like that picture, like looks kind of like a Rubik's Cube, and that little oval there and the text right above it. I'm guessing that's what asset example is. Asset example takes care of setting up that portion right on that white background portion. So what that is a custom component. So you can make your own custom components as well. You don't have to just rely on the built-in React Native components. You can actually make your own component. So that asset example component there is something that somebody just made up. That's a component that you can make up yourself. So it's possible to make custom components also in React Native. So if you have a need for something that none of the built-in components meet, you can't do it with just the built-in components, you can make your own component. You can just make your own that does exactly what you want. Okay, so to do that, the way that you do that is you make an external file. So we can't put it in the same file as our main app. Remember the one that's called app with a capital A, that's always the main entry point. So whenever you start up your React Native app on your device, it's always going to start with that function, with that component. Okay, and that can't change. You can't change the name of it. It's always going to be capital app. Okay, but we can add in extra files into our file space where we can build out our own custom components. We can pull them in and use them in our main app. And that's what's been done with this asset example component right there. Okay, so let me show you where that is. So if you look at our file space here on the left, okay, here's our file space. Notice that you have several files there, app.js, that's the one we're looking at now. Okay, you have some other ones that seem kind of strange. There's this package.json, and then the README. Okay, that one we know about READMEs. READMEs are where you have just some basic information about your app or about your program. And then you have some folders. You have one folder here called assets. When I open that one up, it looks like there's a picture there. I'm guessing that picture is this Rubik's Cube type picture here in our preview. And then there's another folder called components. Looks like there's something in there, asset example.js. Oh, okay, that looks interesting because back in my app, the name of our custom component was asset example. So that looks like it kind of corresponds. So it looks like if I want to know what asset example is, I need to look in that file. Okay, so if I open up that file, okay, well, looks at first glance, looks like just a regular another React Native app file because it looks like at the top, we have a couple of imports. In the middle, we have our main body section. And in the bottom, looks like we have some styles. So it looks like just a standard setup for a React Native app. Okay, but this one makes our own custom component. So if you look carefully, the name of the function here is asset example. So that's the name of our component that we use in our main program, in our main app body. So we have our component there. Looks like inside of that component, there's another view. So there's our container that holds everything. Inside of it, there's a text component, looks like. And in that text component, it says local files and assets can be imported by dragging and dropping them into the editor. Okay, and I can see that that's the text that's right here. Okay, so I can see that that text comes from that text component there. And then there's this image component. Okay, so this image component looks like that image component is using snackicon.png. Looks like it's this kind of looks like kind of a Rubik's Cube with this oval around it. Okay, so it looks like that's where it comes from. Okay, so it looks like this asset example function right here is responsible for creating this asset example component that we use in our main program. So it's kind of neat. You can just make another file in your file space in the components folder of your file space. You can add on these other files that have the same structure as your main app file, imports at the top, main body of the function in the middle, and your styles at the bottom. Has that same structure. Okay, but you can use it as a component in your bigger app. Okay, so asset example, that function that I have there, I can go back to app.js, and that's where it is. That's where I use it. So it's kind of neat. You can make your own components from scratch. Notice the interesting thing about that also, by the way, is that opening tag doesn't have an opening and closing tag like how we normally think of, like a view or text has an opening and a closing. It just has one tag and there's no closing. And sometimes you'll see that in HTML. We saw that also with the break tag. And that's called a self-closing tag. So you don't need an opening and a closing because there's really nothing that's going to be inside of it. It just is there by itself. So notice kind of how it's set up. Looks like a regular tag, but notice at the end, instead of having just a single closing angle bracket, you got a slash and then an angle bracket. And that's all in one tag here. So when you have something like that, that's called a self-closing tag. And it doesn't need an opening and a closing separately. It just closes itself, basically. So that's a custom component. So you can make a custom component just like you would make a standard, your main component file, imports at the top, main body in the middle, and then your styles on the bottom. The other thing you have to do, though, is in order to use it, so I'm back in my main body, or our main app file here. In order to use it, you just have to make sure you import it. Okay, so I'll draw your attention to this line up here. Okay, so that line right there, import asset example from, and then it gives you the file path to where to find the file. Okay, so you have to make sure you import it so that it knows where to find the file, and then it can just stick it in when you use it in your main body of your app right here. Okay, so those are custom components. So that really extends the functionality of React Native a ton, an exponential amount, because you're no longer limited to just what's built in right out of the box, which is, as we saw, is not that much. You can now, the world is wide open. You can make your own custom components that do pretty much anything you want them to. And that's the real power of platforms like this. Okay, so there's something about custom components.